Welcome back to another video. The Christian world has always been fascinated with dynamic preachers who hold the ability to draw audiences into faith through passion, conviction, and personal testimony. Two of the most notable figures who continue to inspire millions today are Gabriel Swaggart and Joyce Meyer. Both stand on stages filled with thousands of eager listeners, and both broadcast their voices into homes across the globe. Yet their influence carries very different tones. The question that often arises is not just about their preaching skills, but about who truly inspires more believers. Gabriel Swaggart, a preacher who carries the legacy of the Swaggart family name, or Joyce Meyer, a woman who transformed personal pain into a universal testimony of strength. Gabriel Swaggart has often been introduced as the youthful face of the Swaggart ministry. As the grandson of Jimmy Swaggart, one of the most controversial yet undeniably powerful evangelists of the 20th century, Gabriel has inherited both the blessings and the burdens of a family name that is known in nearly every Christian household. His preaching is passionate, direct, and rooted in Pentecostal fire. Many admire him for his ability to connect with younger audiences, particularly through media, youth conferences, and his role in continuing the ministry at Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge. Gabriel often emphasizes themes of redemption, the power of the cross, and the importance of staying true to biblical truth. For many who admire him, he represents continuity, the assurance that the Swaggart ministry, despite past controversies, will remain alive through the new generation. Yet, on the other side of the comparison, Joyce Meyer brings a completely different dynamic to the pulpit. Unlike Gabriel, her authority in preaching does not come from a family legacy, but from her own survival and transformation. Joyce Meyer openly speaks of the abuse she suffered as a child, the pain that marked her early years, and the struggles that tried to define her. But instead of allowing her past to destroy her, she chose to rise above it and turn it into a testimony. That testimony became the foundation of her ministry, resonating deeply with believers who see in her not just a preacher, but a living example of faith in action. For many, she is not just someone who teaches the word, she embodies it in her very survival. When comparing the two, many believers often argue that Joyce Meyer inspires a larger and more diverse audience because of her unique story. In a world where women have often been silenced in the pulpit, Joyce has broken barriers, speaking boldly and commanding stages that were historically dominated by men. Her ability to be vulnerable while also standing firm in faith has created a sense of trust among her followers. People don't just listen to her because she is eloquent. They listen because they see themselves in her struggles. She represents hope for the abused, strength for the weak, and courage for those who feel broken. It is this authenticity that many claim sets her apart from Gabriel Swaggart. However, it would be unfair to say that Gabriel's influence is weak compared to Joyce's. In fact, for many younger believers, Gabriel represents something that Joyce cannot. He represents continuity and tradition, a connection to a ministry that spans decades, and a promise that the fire of revival still burns in his generation. Many admire him not only for his preaching but also for his humility in carrying a family legacy that has both fame and scandal. While Joyce's followers admire her resilience against personal trauma, Gabriel's audience admires his resilience against public pressure. Being a Swaggart means facing constant scrutiny, constant comparison, and constant judgment based on past scandals that were not his own doing. Yet he continues to preach, to lead, and to inspire people who believe that God's work in a family cannot be undone by human failure. The comparison between Joyce Meyer and Gabriel Swaggart often comes down to perspective. For those who are looking for someone who understands deep pain and knows how to transform it into power, Joyce Meyer is unmatched. For those who admire legacy, tradition, and the fire of Pentecostal preaching, Gabriel remains a beacon. Yet surveys, opinions, and conversations often show that more people are drawn to Joyce because of one simple reason: trust. Trust is a fragile thing in ministry. It is built not only by words but by transparency and testimony. Joyce has given the world her scars, and in doing so, she has earned their trust. People believe her because she has nothing left to hide. She has already told them the worst of her story, and now they see her thriving despite it. That trust translates into inspiration. On the other hand, Gabriel's journey has not yet been tested in the same way. While he preaches passionately and represents the Swaggart name with honor, he does not yet carry the same level of lived-out testimony that Joyce has. His life, compared to hers, appears relatively stable and shielded. While this is not a weakness, it does create a gap in relatability. People often resonate more deeply with preachers who show their brokenness because it mirrors their own. This is why Joyce, even as a woman in a historically male-dominated field, has often been chosen as the preacher who inspires more believers. Still, the debate continues. For every person who praises Joyce Meyer as the most relatable Christian speaker of her generation, there is another who insists that Gabriel represents the raw power of Pentecostal truth. For every follower who admires Joyce for her strength as a woman, there is another who respects Gabriel for carrying a family legacy without bowing under its weight. Both are inspiring in their own right, but the way inspiration is measured often favors Joyce Meyer. Her books, her sermons, her conferences, and her transparency have given her a platform that Gabriel is still building. She speaks in a way that makes people believe she knows their pain, not just theoretically but personally. Gabriel, on the other hand, inspires through energy, passion, and conviction, but his relatability does not cut as deep because his personal story has not yet been unveiled in the same vulnerable way. Inspiration, therefore, becomes less about theological correctness and more about human connection. And in human connection, Joyce Meyer consistently emerges as the one who inspires more believers. The deeper one looks into the lives of Gabriel Swaggart and Joyce Meyer, the clearer it becomes that both preachers touch hearts, but in very different ways. Gabriel Swaggart draws much of his influence from the fiery, traditional Pentecostal style he inherited from his grandfather, Jimmy Swaggart. His sermons often carry an urgency, a call to repentance, a call to return to the foundations of faith, and a call to embrace the message of the cross without compromise. For many believers, this kind of preaching is refreshing in a modern world where many ministries are accused of diluting the message to appeal to wider audiences. Gabriel's willingness to stay rooted in old-time Pentecostal fire gives him credibility among traditional believers who fear that the younger generation of preachers is losing touch with biblical truth. Yet, when one examines why Joyce Meyer has managed to reach audiences far beyond the church walls, it comes down to her gift of relatability. Joyce does not just preach about the cross, she preaches about life. She speaks to the woman who feels broken in her marriage, to the man who carries scars from childhood abuse, to the teenager who feels unworthy of love, and to the single parent struggling to find hope. Her ministry is not built on a legacy passed down from someone else. It is built on her own lived reality. Every scar she has carries a story, and every story she tells points back to God's power to redeem, restore, and rebuild. This authenticity is what has made her one of the most trusted preachers in modern Christianity. When people listen to Joyce Meyer, they do not hear someone repeating inherited messages. They hear a survivor who has walked through fire and still chosen faith. This trust is what often tips the scale when believers are asked who inspires them more between Gabriel and Joyce. Gabriel inspires respect and admiration, but Joyce inspires trust and hope. For many, trust and hope are far more personal and life-changing than admiration alone. Another factor in this debate is the role of gender in the pulpit. For decades, women were told they could not preach, that the pulpit was reserved for men, and that spiritual authority was not theirs to claim. Joyce Meyer shattered those assumptions by standing on platforms across the world, not as a timid speaker, but as a bold preacher of the gospel. Her courage has not only inspired women, but has also challenged men to rethink their views on what it means to be a leader in faith. Gabriel Swaggart, while powerful in his own right, preaches from a tradition where men in leadership are the norm. Joyce, on the other hand, preaches from a position where her very presence is an act of courage. That difference creates a unique type of inspiration. People see Joyce not just as a preacher, but as a pioneer. She represents every woman who was told she couldn't lead, every victim who was told they couldn't rise again, and every believer who thought they were too broken to serve. By simply standing on stage, she proves otherwise. This symbolic victory resonates deeply with her audiences and explains why, despite Gabriel's strengths, more people often claim Joyce as their source of inspiration. Still, it is important to note that Gabriel's ministry is not without impact. For many, especially within the Swaggart circle of influence, he represents stability and faithfulness. Carrying the Swaggart name is no easy task. It comes with praise but also with criticism, much of it directed at him for things he never did personally. Yet Gabriel has continued to stand in his place, preaching, leading, and representing the family ministry with humility. That in itself is inspirational. It shows a resilience that is often overlooked. To lead a ministry while constantly being compared to both the strengths and failures of past generations requires inner strength that not everyone notices, but many respect. The debate, therefore, is not truly about who is the better preacher. It is about who inspires people on a deeper, more personal level. For many, inspiration is not about theological accuracy or stylistic delivery, but about emotional connection. When people feel understood, they are inspired. When they feel seen in their struggles, they are motivated. And when they see someone who has walked through pain similar to theirs, they are strengthened to keep going. Joyce Meyer consistently provides that connection. which explains why more believers openly admit that she inspires them more than Gabriel Swaggart. Yet the presence of both shows how diverse the body of Christ is. Gabriel may not yet have the level of personal testimony that Joyce does, but he continues to carry a fire that keeps Pentecostal preaching alive in a modern era. Joyce, meanwhile, represents healing and empowerment in a way that transcends denominational lines. Both matter, both inspire. But in the eyes of most believers, Joyce Meyer holds the edge because her story is not just preached from the pulpit, it is lived out in front of the world. In the end, the question of who inspires more believers, Gabriel Swaggart or Joyce Meyer, cannot be answered with simple numbers or statistics. Inspiration is not something that can be measured in television ratings, book sales, or conference attendance. It is something that lives in the hearts of those who hear the message and walk away changed. Both Gabriel and Joyce carry the weight of ministry with sincerity, but their paths to influence could not be more different. Gabriel stands as a torchbearer of a family legacy, a man determined to continue the Pentecostal fire that his grandfather ignited decades ago. Joyce, on the other hand, stands as a self-made voice of strength, a woman who transformed tragedy into triumph and pain into power. For some believers, Gabriel's preaching represents stability, the assurance that the timeless message of the cross will never be forgotten, no matter how modern the world becomes. His youthful energy, his focus on revival, and his determination to lead a new generation make him a preacher who cannot be ignored. For others, Joyce Meyer speaks directly to the heart. She does not merely preach sermons, she shares pieces of her own life, scars and all, and by doing so proves that no past is too dark for God's light. Her openness makes people trust her, and that trust builds a lasting connection that continues to inspire millions worldwide. It may be true that more believers look to Joyce Meyer as their source of inspiration, largely because her story resonates with universal struggles of pain, loss, and healing. Her courage as a woman in a man's world only strengthens that bond with her followers. Yet Gabriel's influence should not be underestimated. He represents a reminder that legacies matter, that faith passed down through generations still has power, and that the fire of Pentecostal preaching is alive and well. His journey is still unfolding, and in time, his story may inspire believers in ways that go far beyond what anyone expects today. Perhaps the better question is not who inspires more, but how each of them inspires differently. Joyce Meyer inspires through vulnerability, healing, and resilience. Gabriel Swaggart inspires through passion, tradition, and determination. Both serve a purpose, and both remind the world that God uses different voices for different reasons. Some believers need the fire, others need the comfort. Some need the preacher who carries a legacy, others need the preacher who broke barriers. Together, they represent two powerful sides of Christian leadership in the modern age. As the years go on, new preachers will rise, new voices will emerge, and the conversation will continue. But today, whether one listens to the strong and passionate voice of Gabriel Swaggart or the relatable and courageous voice of Joyce Meyer, the message remains the same. Faith has the power to change lives. Inspiration may look different depending on who delivers it, but the source of that inspiration remains unchanged. For millions across the world, both preachers, in their own way, point to the same eternal truth, that God can redeem, restore, and inspire, no matter the vessel he chooses. The debate surrounding Gabriel Swaggart and Joyce Meyer is more than just a matter of personal preference. It reflects the way people experience faith in their own lives. For decades, the Christian world has seen leaders rise and fall, but very few manage to carve a place in the hearts of millions. Both Gabriel and Joyce belong to that rare group, and yet, the way they inspire others reveals a striking difference in how people connect with spiritual leadership. For Gabriel, inspiration flows from heritage. When he steps onto a platform, many in the audience already know his last name, and with that recognition comes both reverence and expectation. He does not speak as a lone voice in the wilderness. He speaks as the grandson of Jimmy Swaggart, a man whose preaching once drew crowds of tens of thousands. That legacy is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it opens doors. On the other hand, it casts a shadow. Gabriel has had to learn how to carry the torch without being consumed by the weight of his family's past. That perseverance alone makes him inspiring to those who see his journey as one of resilience. It is not easy to stand under the spotlight when the world is waiting to compare you to giants of the past, and yet he continues to do it with passion and conviction. Joyce Meyer, however, stands not in a legacy created by others, but in one carved out of her own pain. Her testimony of abuse at the hands of her father is no secret, and for many years she carried the shame and silence that comes with trauma. Yet she refused to remain silent forever. By sharing her story openly, she gave voice to millions who had suffered in the shadows. Her ministry became more than preaching, it became a lifeline. People listened to her not only because she quoted scripture, but because she embodied it. She preached about forgiveness, while living proof of its difficulty. She preached about faith, while admitting that her journey was filled with doubt. She preached about strength, while acknowledging the scars that nearly broke her. That level of honesty is what makes her stand out, and what compels so many to say that Joyce Meyer inspires them more than anyone else. The role of gender in this debate cannot be ignored. In a world where women have historically been silenced, Joyce's boldness is revolutionary. Every sermon she delivers is a statement that women are not just called to sit in pews, they are called to lead, to preach, to guide, and to inspire. This act of defiance against cultural and religious limitations has inspired women around the globe to rise, to speak, and to believe that they too can lead in faith. While Gabriel inspires by upholding tradition, Joyce inspires by rewriting it. Her very presence in the pulpit challenges centuries of assumptions and proves that God's call knows no gender. Still, Gabriel's influence cannot be dismissed. His preaching resonates especially with young believers who feel caught between modernity and tradition. In an age where entertainment and distraction often drown out spiritual conviction, Gabriel reminds his audience of the raw, unfiltered power of Pentecostal truth. His voice is strong, his style is direct, and his message is uncompromising. This resonates with those who fear that Christianity is being watered down to please the world. For them, Gabriel is not just a preacher, he is a defender of the faith. His ability to hold firm in a shifting culture makes him a source of inspiration for believers who value boldness over relatability. Joyce Meyer's style, however, leans heavily on relatability. She doesn't just talk about the big issues of theology, she talks about everyday struggles. She discusses anger, bitterness, jealousy, anxiety, fear, and all the small cracks in daily life that most preachers avoid. By doing so, she makes Christianity accessible. People listen to her and feel that their private struggles are not ignored by God. She has a way of breaking down complex spiritual truths into practical steps, and in doing so, she gives believers tools to survive in the real world. This practicality is part of what makes her so inspiring. People don't just hear her, they apply her lessons in their daily lives and see results. The conversation about who inspires more believers often circles back to one word: trust. People trust Joyce Meyer because she has shown them her worst moments and invited them into her journey. They know her scars, her battles, and her weaknesses. In that vulnerability, they see authenticity. Gabriel, in contrast, remains guarded. His ministry is strong, but his personal story is less known. While this gives him an image of stability, it also creates a distance. People are inspired by his preaching but may not always feel connected to his life in the same intimate way they feel with Joyce. That connection often tips the balance in her favor. Yet, inspiration is not always about who has the larger following. For some, Gabriel's consistency is exactly what they need. They do not look for dramatic testimonies but for a steady hand that will not waver. He represents continuity, a reminder that even when scandals shake families or ministries, God still raises up new leaders to carry the message forward. In this sense, Gabriel's inspiration lies in endurance. He stands as proof that faith can outlast failure, that a family can still produce fruit after a season of loss, and that young leaders can still hold fast to old truths in a new world. Both Gabriel and Joyce demonstrate that inspiration comes in many forms. For Joyce, it is the courage to rise from ashes. For Gabriel, it is the determination to remain standing in the storm. Both speak to the resilience of faith, but they do so from different perspectives. Joyce shows believers how to rebuild after devastation,